5, I had a dream of becoming a scientist. I was inspired by my mother, who was pursuing her PhD at that time in St. Petersburg, and irrevocably became my distant role model. Later in school, I fell in love with physics and mathematics and went to Moscow to get my PhD. Those were the years of collapse of the former Soviet Union, when in Armenia one lacked the very basic things for pursuing a scientific career. The libraries were not getting any journals, and in the presence of severe energy crisis, one had no access to internet or email. So I eventually became very serious about finding a permanent position in the West, that with the huge knowledge gap that I inherited from the Soviet education, it appeared to be a lot more challenging than I had anticipated. For the following few years, I tirelessly invested myself in self-education. As one would say, when there is a will, there is a way. And I unconditionally believed in it, and I believe in it up to this day. To make the long story short, after a few short-term fellowships in Europe, I eventually found myself in the United States working on stability analysis of adaptive flight control systems. All these years, there was something that was walking with me side by side, or rather to say, walking against me. I'm sure a scientist or not, many of you are not a stranger to this thing either. I would dare to suggest many of you had your shares of battles with it, and that's resistance to innovation, ingrained in the attempts to challenge the status quo. I used to think of science as a cool hub of ideas where everything is supposed to clash against each other, and the most impactful and innovative ones should emerge. It's supposed to thrive on innovation. Yet in practice, I came to observe something completely different. I saw and personally experienced territorial wars led by already established schools of thought against the newly emerging ones. Capitalizing on their power and status, the established schools of thought strangled innovation. Or more appropriate to say, they dared to strangle it. It's a lot like the myth about Kronos in Greek mythology. After overpowering his abusive father and saving his siblings, the story tells that Kronos becomes the ruler of the universe and makes life heavenly on earth for everyone. As time goes by, he feels more and more comfortable in his position as king. He comes to love the power, the status, and enjoy all of that. It's exactly then when he learns the prophecy that his kids will grow to overthrow him. He starts fearing the change, becomes protective of his status, and guess what he does? Any guess? He starts swallowing his children alive. Isn't it fascinating how much of life can be explained through these ancient scripts? The same fears running through the veins of the ruler of the universe run through the veins of the established schools of thought as they're trying subconsciously or intentionally kill innovation. The fears in scientific system can be different. Sometimes it's about preserving status. Other times it can be purely about competition or recognition, or about jealousy that humans will try very hard to hide, yet will fail at it miserably. Or sometimes a piece of innovation can be too much ahead of its time to be properly recognized as such. Take, for example, George Boole. This man was a self-taught mathematician in 19th century England. Without going to Oxford or Cambridge or any other university, he went ahead and explored the ties between mathematics and logic. See? At that time, logic was a philosophical discipline, yet he pushed the idea that logic must be a mathematical discipline. His ideas were recognized by the royal family, yet his publications had a very little audience, and his ideas were largely disregarded. The historical timing didn't allow for the innovation to thrive. Innovation being swallowed whole by the history is at least as much of a pity as the newborns being swallowed by their father. Wouldn't you agree? And while we're back at it, do you know how the story with Kronos ends? His wife, being devastated by the destiny of her children, felt so miserable that she decided to save the youngest one, Zeus. When he was born, she hid him, giving Kronos instead a piece of rock to swallow. Zeus grew up, saved his siblings, and became the ruler of the universe. Just like that, as timing didn't allow for Bool's theory to take off, there is no stopping innovation. Time passed, other scientists discovered Bool's publications, built upon it, that later became known as Boolean algebra. Today it's recognized for having laid the foundation of digital era. If not for Bool's theory, we would have had no opportunity to email each other, send messages over Facebook, watch Netflix. If not for Bool's theory, it would have been impossible for us to send spacecraft to Mars and Moon, and to do lots of other simple things that we have learned to take simply for granted. If not for Boole, our society would have been functioning quite differently. Boole's innovation about logic is not the only one that was resisted in the history. When Hungarian physician Semmelweis suggested that physicians and other practitioners should wash their hands in between patients in 19th century Austria to reduce the mortality rates, he was largely resisted by the medical community. Not only he was rejected, he was also ridiculed because his idea offended the social status of the physicians as gentlemen whose hands couldn't be unclean. It took the society another 20 years to catch up with Louis Pasteur's germ theory to prove that people need to wash their hands more often, to prove that Semmelweis was right. I bet you are all familiar with Galileo's story. When he observed that Earth is rotating around the sun, put mildly, the church disagreed. And it took another few centuries to admit that Galileo was right. And fast forward to modern times, in 70s, Kilmer McCulley discovered that cholesterol and clogged arteries are not the causes, but rather the symptoms of heart disease. His theory that could have saved millions of lives was also rejected by the medical community. In fact, he was banished from Harvard University and denied a new position for another 2 years by any other place. And it took another 30 years to understand and admit his theory and later reward him with multiple medals. Who knows? It may have taken a millennia for Zeus to overthrow Kronos. There is a moral to these stories. No matter how long it takes, innovations eventually break through. There is something also akin of a secret to these stories. No matter how challenging, walking against the resistance, there is always something gratifying to it. If you want to know what's so gratifying about it, let me break it down for you. First and foremost, without the resistance, we wouldn't know how great of a job we are doing, because the resistance emerges when the idea challenges the status quo. Imagine, would Kronos set out to swallow his children if he wouldn't have felt that his status as the ruler of the universe was threatened? No, he did that exactly when he heard the prophecy that his kids will grow up to overthrow him. Next in line, Resistance makes us more agile. To make our ideas bulletproof, we turn to different communities and people with different backgrounds than others to polish our ideas from multiple perspectives and not from just single angle. I'll tell you what, Zeus would have had no chance against his father if not for his mother, who saved him by tricking Cronus to swallow a piece of rock instead. And finally, resistance helps us with our endless self-realization. And believe me, in a field as idea-driven and endless as science, that's one great achievement. Because if not for the mission to overthrow his father and all the skills acquired along the way, Zeus would have never been worthy to be the god ruling the universe. So next time you're driving your ideas home, challenging or not, the resistance you are experiencing is a telltale sign that something great is about to break through, be it your innovative idea or you as a person or personality. And today, more than ever, we need any breakthrough that we can get because our pretty little blue planet Earth is as far as it can be from the heavenly state of Cronus' time.